June 1st, 1918, 0430 hours. Chauchat, France. 24-year-old Captain Lloyd Williams of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, stood at a crossroads 3 kilometers west of the Marne River, watching French colonial troops stream past his position in full retreat. The French soldiers, Senegalese infantry who had been holding defensive positions along the Marne, were exhausted, disorganized, and terrified. Officers were attempting to maintain unit cohesion, but most units had disintegrated into small groups, moving west as fast as fatigue and darkness allowed. Williams counted approximately 4,000 French soldiers passing through his sector between 0430 and 0600 hours. None of them stopped to establish new defensive positions. A French colonel, riding a horse and attempting to rally his retreating soldiers, stopped when he saw Williams and his Marines preparing defensive positions along the road. The colonel spoke in rapid French, which Williams' interpreter translated. "You must retreat immediately. The Germans are coming. They have broken through our lines. Paris will fall within days. There is no point in dying here." Captain Williams looked at the French colonel, at the retreating soldiers, at the road that led west toward Paris, 42 kilometers away, and then at his Marines. He turned back to the colonel and said 5 words that would become part of United States Marine Corps legend. "Retreat? Hell, we just got here." The statement was not bravado. It was tactical reality. The 4th Marine Brigade, consisting of the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments, approximately 8,000 soldiers, had arrived in France only weeks earlier. They had trained with French forces, learning trench warfare tactics, adjusting to European combat conditions. They had been held in reserve, waiting for the moment when American forces would be committed to combat. That moment had arrived on June 1st, 1918, when the German Spring Offensive, the largest German attack of World War I, threatened to break through Allied lines and capture Paris. The German offensive, launched on March 21st, 1918, had been devastatingly successful. 3 German armies, totaling over 1 million soldiers, had attacked along a 70-kilometer front, broken through British defensive lines, and advanced 60 kilometers in 3 weeks. By June 1st, German forces were positioned along the Marne River, within artillery range of Paris. French civilians were evacuating the capital. Allied commanders were preparing contingency plans for the loss of Paris. The strategic situation was desperate. The 4th Marine Brigade had been ordered to establish defensive positions west of Chauchat and hold at all costs. The Marines were the only intact American unit available to plug the gap in French defensive lines. If they failed, German forces would have an unobstructed route to Paris. If they succeeded, they might buy time for French and British forces to establish new defensive lines and organize a counteroffensive. Captain Williams commanded the 51st Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, approximately 250 soldiers organized into 4 rifle platoons and a company headquarters. His Marines were equipped with Springfield M1903 rifles, Chauchat automatic rifles, French-made light machine guns that were notoriously unreliable, and M1917 Browning machine guns. They wore U.S. Army uniforms, olive drab wool with distinctive doughboy helmets, because the Marine Corps did not have sufficient uniforms for an expanded wartime force. To French soldiers and German soldiers, they looked like American Army infantry. Only their unit patches and their aggressive combat doctrine would identify them as Marines. What separated these 8,000 Marines from the approximately 2 million other American soldiers in France was their training and their institutional culture. The Marine Corps in 1918 was a small, elite force that emphasized marksmanship, discipline, and aggressive offensive tactics. Every Marine was trained as a rifleman first, regardless of specialty. Marine marksmanship standards required soldiers to hit targets at 500 yards, longer range than most European armies consider practical. Marine doctrine emphasized attack over defense, maneuver over attrition, and individual initiative over rigid command structures. This doctrine was fundamentally incompatible with Western Front warfare in 1918. The Western Front had been deadlocked for 3 years, with both sides occupying elaborate trench systems protected by barbed wire, machine guns, and artillery. Attacks across no man's land typically resulted in catastrophic casualties. The British Army had lost 60,000 soldiers on the first day of the Battle of the Somme in 1916, most of them killed by machine gun fire while advancing across open ground. French Army mutinies in 1917 had been triggered by soldiers refusing to participate in suicidal frontal assaults. Every experienced officer on the Western Front understood that attacking fortified positions meant accepting massive casualties. The Marines had not yet learned this lesson. They would learn it at Belleau Wood. At 0600 hours on June 1st, 1918, Captain Williams received orders from his battalion commander, Major Thomas Holcomb. The orders were simple. Establish defensive positions along the Paris-Metz road. Prepare to repel German attack. Do not withdraw under any circumstances. Williams positioned his company along a low ridge overlooking wheat fields that extended north toward Belleau Wood, a hunting preserve approximately 1 square kilometer in size, consisting of dense forest, rocky outcrops, and tangled underbrush. French maps identified the location as Bois de Belleau, Belleau Wood. It appeared to be tactically insignificant terrain. Too small to conceal a large force, too densely wooded for effective maneuver, offering no obvious strategic value. What Williams did not know was that German forces had occupied Belleau Wood during the night of May 31st. Elements of the German 461st Infantry Regiment, approximately 1,200 soldiers, had moved into the woods and established defensive positions among the rocks and trees. They had brought MG-08 machine guns, German Maxim guns capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, mortars, and artillery observers. They had cleared fields of fire, positioned machine guns to create interlocking fire zones, and prepared the woods for defense. By dawn on June 1st, Belleau Wood was a fortress. At 1,700 hours on June 1st, German artillery began shelling Marine positions along the Paris-Metz road. The bombardment was not the massive preparatory fires typical of Western Front offensives. The Germans were conserving artillery ammunition for their primary offensive toward Paris. Instead, it was harassing fire designed to disrupt American defensive preparations. Approximately 200 shells impacted on Marine positions over 3 hours. 5 Marines were killed, 14 wounded. At 2,000 hours, as darkness fell, German infantry attempted to probe Marine defensive positions. Small groups of German soldiers, typically 10 to 15 men, advanced through the wheat fields toward Marine lines, attempting to identify defensive strong points and weak points. Marine riflemen engaged at ranges beyond 400 yards, longer than German soldiers expected Americans to fire accurately. The German probes were stopped with minimal casualties to Marine forces. The German company commander, Hauptmann Emil Müller, reported to his battalion headquarters at 2,130 hours. American forces occupying positions west of Belleau Wood. Estimated strength 1 battalion. Soldiers are well-disciplined and accurate riflemen. Recommend against frontal assault without artillery support. Muller's assessment was tactically sound but strategically irrelevant. German high command was not interested in assaulting Marine positions. The German objective was Paris, not a small hunting preserve in the French countryside. Belleau Wood was simply a convenient location to position defensive forces, while the main German offensive advanced further west. The Germans would hold Belleau Wood, use it as a base for artillery observation, and wait for the Americans to either retreat or attack. The Marines chose to attack. On June 2, 1918, at 0800 hours, Brigadier General James Harbord, commander of the 4th Marine Brigade, received orders from Major General Omar Bundy, commanding the U.S. 2nd Division. The orders directed Harbord to clear Belleau Wood of enemy forces and establish control of high ground north of Chauchat. Harbord was a U.S. Army officer. The Marine Corps did not have general officers in 1918, but he understood Marine culture and capabilities. He knew his Marines were aggressive, well-trained, and inexperienced in Western Front combat. He also knew that French commanders expected American forces to fail when faced with German defensive positions. Harbord made a decision that would define the Battle of Belleau Wood. Rather than conduct careful reconnaissance and deliberate planning, he would commit his Marines to immediate assault. The attack would demonstrate American combat effectiveness and prevent German forces from consolidating their positions in Belleau Wood. The attack was scheduled for June 6, 1918 at 1,700 hours. For days of preparation time to reconnoiter German positions, coordinate artillery support, brief subordinate commanders, and position assault forces. In retrospect, 4 days was insufficient time to plan an assault on a fortified position. But Harbord believed that speed and aggression would compensate for inadequate preparation. Between June 2nd and June 5th, Marine reconnaissance patrols attempted to gather intelligence about German positions in Belleau Wood. The patrols quickly discovered that approaching the woods was extremely dangerous. German machine gunners had cleared fields of fire across the wheat fields, and any movement during daylight hours drew immediate fire. Night patrols could approach closer but risk stumbling into German defensive positions in the darkness. By June 5th, Marine intelligence had identified approximately 20 German machine gun positions on the southern edge of Belleau Wood, but had no accurate information about German strength deeper in the woods or on the northern edge. Artillery support for the attack would be provided by French 75mm guns, the famous French 75 field artillery pieces that had been the backbone of French artillery throughout the war. The guns were accurate and fast-firing, but they fired relatively small shells with limited destructive power against fortified positions. The French artillery commander, Colonel Pierre Malone, told Harbord that the available artillery was insufficient to destroy German positions in Belleau Wood. The shells would suppress German fire during the initial assault, but would not eliminate the defensive positions. Marine infantry would have to clear the woods through close combat. Captain Williams attended the pre-attack briefing on June 5th at 1,400 hours. His battalion commander, Major Holcomb, outlined the plan. The 5th Marines will attack the southern edge of Belleau Wood at 1,700 hours tomorrow. French artillery will fire for 30 minutes, then lift. Immediately after the artillery lifts, all companies will advance in line across the wheat fields and enter the woods. Once inside, companies will advance north through the woods until reaching the northern edge. Estimated time to clear the woods: 4 hours. Questions. Williams asked a question that every experienced infantry officer would ask. What are our expected casualties? Holcomb's response was honest. French commanders estimate 50% casualties in the initial assault across the wheat fields. Once we're in the woods, casualties would depend on how many Germans are actually in there. Could be light, could be heavy. We won't know until we attack. 50% casualties. That meant Williams could expect to lose 125 of his 250 soldiers before even reaching the woods. It was an acceptable casualty rate only if the objective was strategically critical. Belleau Wood was not strategically critical. It was a small hunting preserve with no obvious military value. But orders were orders, and Marines did not question orders. Captain Williams briefed his platoon commanders at 1,600 hours on June 5th. Tomorrow at 1,700 hours, we attack Belleau Wood. We'll advance in line across the wheat fields. The fields are approximately 400 meters wide. German machine guns will engage us as soon as we leave our positions. Keep moving. Do not take cover. Do not stop. If you stop, you die. If you keep moving, some of you will reach the woods. Once we're in the woods, we'll clear the Germans out room by room, tree by tree. This will be brutal and personal. Prepare your men accordingly. One of the platoon leaders, Second Lieutenant Lemuel Shepard from Virginia, asked, Sir, what happens if we can't make it across the wheat fields? What if casualties are too heavy? Williams' response captured the essence of Marine Corps culture in 1918. Then we'll die in the wheat fields. But we're not stopping. We're Marines. We attack. At 1,630 hours on June 6, 1918, 250 Marines of the 51st Company, 5th Marines, waited in fighting positions along the southern edge of a wheat field. Across the field, 400 meters away, was Belleau Wood. Between the Marines and the woods was open ground covered in chest-high wheat, offering concealment but no cover. German machine gunners had spent 5 days preparing to defend that open ground. Every Marine knew that crossing those 400 meters would be the longest 400 meters of their lives. At 1,700 hours, French artillery opened fire. 75mm shells screamed over Marine positions and impacted in Belleau Wood. The bombardment was impressive. Explosions walked to the southern edge of the woods, throwing up dirt, shattered trees, and smoke. But experienced soldiers recognized that the shells were too small to destroy fortified positions. The artillery was suppression, not destruction. German soldiers would take cover during the bombardment, then return to their machine guns when it stopped. At 1,730 hours, the artillery fire lifted. For approximately 30 seconds, there was silence. Then, across a 500-meter front, 800 Marines stood up and began walking toward Belleau Wood. They did not run. They did not take cover. They walked in extended lines, rifles at port arms, maintaining formation, advancing at a steady pace across the wheat fields. It was parade ground precision applied to combat assault. Exactly how Marines have been trained, and exactly the wrong tactic for Western Front warfare. German machine gunners returned to their positions and opened fire. The sound was overwhelming, a continuous mechanical roar of overlapping machine gun fire. MG-08 machine guns fired at a cyclic rate of 500 rounds per minute, with approximately 20 machine guns firing simultaneously. The Germans were putting 10,000 rounds per minute into the wheat fields. The first Marines fell within seconds. Some were killed instantly, shot multiple times. Others were wounded and attempted to crawl back toward Marine lines. Most kept advancing, stepping over fallen comrades, maintaining formation, walking through fire that killed men with mathematical certainty. Private Carl Andrew Brannan, a 19-year-old Marine from Mississippi, was in the first wave of the attack. 50 years later, he would write in his memoir, "We walked into hell. Men fell like wheat under a scythe. I saw soldiers cut in half by machine gun fire. I saw men with their faces shot away, still trying to advance. I saw courage that defied understanding. And I saw stupidity that defied belief. We should have crawled. We should have used cover. We should have done anything except walk upright across that field. But we were Marines. We were taught to attack. So we attacked." Captain Williams was hit twice during the advance across the wheat fields. The first bullet struck his left shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. He kept walking. The second bullet hit his right leg, shattering his femur. He collapsed, unable to stand. His company continued the attack without him. Of the 250 Marines who began the assault, 112 reached the southern edge of Belleau Wood. 138 were casualties. 53 killed, 85 wounded. 55% casualties, exactly what French commanders had predicted. But the Marines were inside the woods. And now the real battle would begin. June 6, 1918. 1,745 hours. Southern edge of Belleau Wood. First Lieutenant Lemuel Cornick Shepard, Jr. reached the tree line at the southern edge of Belleau Wood with 17 Marines from his platoon. He had started the assault with 43. 26 were casualties, 9 killed in the wheat fields, 17 wounded. The survivors were scattered among the rocks and trees, taking cover, catching their breath, preparing for the next phase of the assault. Shepard was 22 years old, a 1917 graduate of Virginia Military Institute, commissioned as a Marine officer 6 months before deploying to France. He had never experienced combat before June 6. In the next 20 minutes, he would learn more about combat than 4 years of military education had taught him. The woods were unlike anything Shepard had expected. French intelligence had described Belleau Wood as light forest with good visibility. The reality was different. The woods consisted of ancient trees, some over 100 feet tall, with trunks thick enough that 3 men could not wrap their arms around them. The forest floor was covered with massive boulders, some as large as automobiles, creating a maze of rock formations. Underbrush was so dense that visibility beyond 10 meters was impossible in many locations. The woods were not a battlefield. They were a 3-dimensional killing ground where every tree could hide a sniper, every boulder could conceal a machine gun, and every clearing could be a pre-planned kill zone. At 1,750 hours, Shepard attempted to organize his surviving Marines for an advance north through the woods. Before he could issue orders, German machine gun fire erupted from approximately 30 meters ahead. The Germans had positioned machine guns in depth, not just on the southern edge of the woods, but throughout the interior. As Marines entered the woods, they were advancing directly into interlocking fields of fire. The Marines took cover behind trees and rocks and returned fire. But returning fire against an unseen enemy in dense woods was largely ineffective. The Germans were using the terrain expertly, firing from concealed positions, then moving before Marines could identify their locations. Shepard realized that his platoon could not advance in any organized formation. The woods made formations impossible. Instead, the battle devolved into small groups of Marines, typically 3 to 5 soldiers, moving from cover to cover, searching for German positions, engaging in firefights at ranges under 50 meters. Private Daniel Joseph Daly, a 34-year-old Marine from New York, had already earned 2 Medals of Honor in previous combat, one in China during the Boxer Rebellion, one in Haiti in 1915. He was the most experienced combat soldier in the 5th Marines, and he understood immediately that the assault was failing. Marines were taking cover, returning fire, but not advancing. The attack had stalled within minutes of entering the woods. At 1,758 hours, Daly stood up, fixed his bayonet, and shouted words that would become part of Marine Corps legend. "Come on, you sons of bitches. Do you want to live forever?" Then he charged toward the nearest German position, firing his rifle, inspiring Marines around him to follow. Approximately 30 Marines joined his attack, advancing in a chaotic rush toward German machine gun positions. The charge was tactically insane and personally suicidal. Charging German machine guns was exactly the kind of frontal assault that had killed hundreds of thousands of British and French soldiers over the previous 3 years. But Daly's attack had an unexpected effect. It shocked German defenders who had expected Americans to be cautious and methodical. The sudden aggressive assault disrupted German defensive positions, forcing machine gun crews to abandon their positions and fall back deeper into the woods. Daly's charge gained approximately 100 meters of ground and destroyed 3 German machine gun positions. It also caused 11 Marine casualties, 3 killed, 8 wounded. Daly himself was hit by shrapnel from a German hand grenade, but refused medical evacuation. Between 1800 and 1900 hours on June 6, the battle in Belleau Wood became a series of disconnected small unit actions. Marine rifle squads advanced through the woods, encountering German positions at close range, engaging in firefights that lasted minutes or seconds, then moving to the next engagement. There was no front line, no organized offensive positions, no clear indication of which parts of the woods were controlled by which forces. German soldiers and American Marines could be within 20 meters of each other without seeing each other. Navigation was nearly impossible. The dense canopy blocked sunlight, making it difficult to determine direction. Units became separated, lost contact with adjacent units, and often had no idea where they were within the woods. Corporal Thomas Eugene Carroll, a machine gun section leader from Pennsylvania, was attempting to move his Browning M1917 machine gun forward when his section stumbled into a German defensive position. The Germans were dug into a natural rock formation, with a machine gun positioned to cover a narrow clearing. Carroll's section was caught in the open, pinned down by German fire. 2 Marines were killed immediately, 3 more wounded. Carroll made a decision that would earn him a Navy Cross. He grabbed a satchel of hand grenades, told his section provide covering fire, and began crawling toward the German position. He crawled approximately 40 meters through underbrush, using the terrain to mask his movement, approaching the German position from an unexpected angle. At 15 meters, he began throwing grenades. The first grenade landed among the German machine gun crew, killing 2 soldiers and wounding 2 others. The second grenade destroyed the machine gun. The third grenade hit a German ammunition supply, causing a secondary explosion that killed the remaining German soldiers in position. Carroll's action was typical of the combat in Belleau Wood. Individual initiative, personal courage, acceptance of extreme risk. Marine doctrine emphasized that every Marine was a rifleman capable of independent action. In the tangled terrain of Belleau Wood, that doctrine was essential. Officers and NCOs could not control the battle through traditional command structures. Instead, individual Marines made tactical decisions based on immediate circumstances, attacked when they saw opportunities, and accepted that their decisions might result in their deaths. By 2,000 hours on June 6th, as darkness fell, Marine commanders had no clear understanding of the tactical situation in Belleau Wood. Some Marine units had penetrated several hundred meters into the woods. Other units were still fighting near the southern edge. Communications were nearly impossible. Telephone lines were cut by artillery fire, runners were killed or lost in the woods, and radio technology in 1918 was too primitive for tactical use. Battalion and regimental commanders were making decisions based on incomplete and outdated information. Major Holcomb, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, attempted to assess his unit status at 20-30 hours. He had started the assault with approximately 1,000 Marines. Casualty reports indicated 316 killed or wounded, 32% casualties in 4 hours. But the casualty reports were incomplete. Many wounded Marines were still in the woods, unable to reach aid stations. Many dead Marines lay in the wheat fields, uncollected. The true casualty count was likely closer to 400. Holcomb faced a critical decision. Should he order his Marines to withdraw from the woods, consolidate positions, and attempt a better planned assault the next day? Or should he continue the attack through the night, accepting additional casualties but maintaining pressure on German forces? He chose to continue the attack. Withdrawing would mean abandoning wounded Marines in the woods. It would also mean ceding the initiative to German forces, allowing them to reinforce their positions. Most importantly, withdrawing would be psychologically devastating to Marines who had suffered terrible casualties to reach their current positions. Holcomb radioed Brigade headquarters at 20:45 hours. 2nd Battalion will continue attack through night. Request artillery support on northern edge of woods at first light. The night battle in Belleau between June 6th and June 7th was chaotic, terrifying, and deadly. Marines advanced through darkness, unable to see more than a few meters, relying on sound to identify enemy positions. German soldiers fired flares, illumination rounds that lit the woods with harsh white light for 30 to 40 seconds, revealing Marine positions, then plunging everything back into darkness. The light-dark light transitions were disorienting, making it difficult to maintain situational awareness or coordinate movement. Hand-to-hand combat occurred frequently during the night. Marines encountered German positions at ranges of 5 to 10 meters, too close for effective rifle fire, resulting in combat with bayonets, knives, entrenching tools, and rifle butts. Private Carl Brandon later described the night fighting. It was primitive and savage. We fought like animals. Men screamed, bled, died in darkness. I killed a German soldier with my bayonet at a range where I could smell his breath. I felt his blood on my hands. I have never forgotten it. By dawn on June 7th, Marine forces controlled approximately one-third of Belleau Wood, the southern portion, and parts of the western edge. German forces had withdrawn to positions in the northern half of the woods, where they established new defensive lines anchored on particularly good terrain. The night's fighting had cost both sides heavy casualties. The Marines suffered an additional 193 casualties, 41 killed, 152 wounded. German casualties were estimated at 120 killed or wounded, based on body counts and prisoner interrogations. The tactical situation was clear. Belleau was too large, too difficult, and too well defended to be cleared in a single assault. The battle would continue for days, possibly weeks. Every meter of ground would have to be fought for individually. The woods would have to be cleared tree by tree, rock by rock, position by position. Between June 7th and June 10th, Marine units conducted limited attacks to expand their control in Belleau Wood. These were not large-scale assaults but small unit operations, platoon or squad level, designed to eliminate specific German positions. Each operation followed the same pattern. Identify a German position, call artillery or mortar fire on the position, assault immediately after the fire lifted, clear the position in close combat, then consolidate and prepare to defend against German counterattack. The casualties were relentless. Every day produced 50 to 100 killed or wounded. Medical aid stations were overwhelmed. Wounded Marines waited hours for treatment. The most seriously wounded were evacuated to field hospitals, but many died before reaching medical care. Bodies accumulated in the woods, both American and German, because retrieving bodies under fire was too dangerous. The smell of death became constant. On June 10th, German forces launched their first major counterattack. At 0400 hours, approximately 300 German soldiers from the 28th Division attacked Marine positions in the western portion of Belleau Wood. The attack was preceded by artillery and mortar fire, followed by infantry assault using infiltration tactics. Small groups moving to the woods, attacking weak points in Marine defensive positions. The counterattack hit positions held by the 6th Marines, who had relieved the 5th Marines on June 8th. The 6th Marines had only been in the woods for 2 days and were still adjusting to the terrain and the combat conditions. The German attack achieved initial success, penetrating Marine lines in 2 locations and recapturing approximately 150 meters of ground. Major Maurice Shearer, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines, organized an immediate counterattack. At 0445 hours, 2 Marine companies, approximately 300 soldiers, counterattacked the German penetration. The fighting was savage. Marines advanced with fixed bayonets, engaging German soldiers at close range, clearing positions through direct assault. The counterattack succeeded in stopping the German advance, but at terrible cost. The 2 Marine companies suffered 79 casualties in 30 minutes of combat. The German counterattack demonstrated that German forces in Belleau were not simply defending. They were capable of offensive operations. Marine commanders realized that clearing the woods would require not just attacking German positions, but also defending against German counterattacks. The woods had become a meat grinder, consuming both sides in the battle of attrition, where victory would go to whichever force could sustain casualties longer. Between June 11th and June 15th, the battle continued with the same pattern. Marine attacks during daylight, German counterattacks at night or early morning, constant casualties, minimal territorial gains. By June 15th, the Marines had suffered over 2,000 casualties since the battle began. The 5th and 6th Marine regiments were at approximately 60% strength. Individual companies that had started the battle with 250 soldiers were now down to 100 or fewer combat-effective troops. American newspaper correspondents were reporting on the battle, sending stories back to the United States about Marines fighting in a place called Belleau Wood. The stories emphasized Marine courage and determination while downplaying the horrific casualties. The American public was receiving a sanitized version of the battle, heroic Marines defeating Germans, rather than the reality of brutal attrition warfare. German intelligence was also tracking the battle. German commanders recognized that American Marines were fighting with unusual aggression and accepting casualties that French or British forces would have considered unsustainable. German soldiers began calling the Marines Teufelhunden, devil dogs, a term that supposedly reflected German respect for Marine ferocity. The term would become central to Marine Corps mythology, though historians later questioned whether Germans actually used the term or whether it was American propaganda. On June 16th, Brigadier General Harbord made a decision that would extend the battle for another 10 days. Rather than accept partial control of Belleau Wood, he ordered a final offensive to clear the entire woods. The attack would involve fresh troops, the 7th Infantry Regiment, U.S. Army, attached to Marine Brigade, supported by maximum available artillery. The objective was to eliminate German forces completely, securing the woods and ending the battle decisively. The final offensive began on June 23, 1918, with the largest artillery bombardment of the entire battle. Over 14 hours, French and American artillery fired approximately 30,000 shells into Belleau Wood. The bombardment was intended to destroy German defensive positions and demoralize German defenders. It achieved partial success. Many German positions were destroyed or damaged, and German casualties from the artillery were significant. But German forces remained capable of defense, and they prepared to make the final American assault as costly as possible. June 23, 1918, 1,700 hours. Southern edge of Belleau Wood. Captain Roswell Winans of the 7th Infantry Regiment, U.S. Army, watched the artillery fire walk through Belleau with a mixture of professional appreciation and personal dread. The bombardment was impressive. Shells impacted at a rate of approximately 30 per minute, throwing up columns of smoke, dirt, and shattered trees. But Winans had seen artillery bombardments before, and he knew that artillery rarely eliminated well-prepared defensive positions. The Germans would survive in dugouts and bunkers, wait for the artillery to stop, then return to their fighting positions and machine guns. The infantry would still have to clear the woods through close combat. Winans commanded Company A, 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry, approximately 140 soldiers who had been attached to the 4th Marine Brigade specifically for this final assault. His company had been positioned south of Belleau Wood for 2 days, watching Marines fight in the woods, listening to the constant sound of machine gun fire and explosions, seeing the steady stream of wounded being evacuated. The soldiers of Company A understood that they were being sent into the same meat grinder that had consumed over 2,000 Marines over the previous 17 days. At 1800 hours, the artillery fire shifted from Belleau Wood to targets north of the woods, German artillery positions and reserve positions. This was a signal for the infantry assault to begin. Across a 400-meter front, approximately 900 American soldiers, 600 Marines from the 5th and 6th Regiments, 300 soldiers from the 7th Infantry, stood up and began advancing toward the woods. The assault on June 23rd was fundamentally different from the initial assault on June 6th. The soldiers did not walk in parade ground formations. They advanced in small groups, using terrain for cover, moving quickly from position to position, employing fire and maneuver tactics. They had learned from 17 days of combat that frontal assaults in extended lines resulted in catastrophic casualties. The new tactics were more effective but also slower. Instead of crossing the wheat fields in 15 minutes, the advance took 45 minutes. German machine guns opened fire as soon as American forces entered the wheat fields. But the volume of fire was noticeably less than on June 6. German forces in Belleau had been worn down by 17 days of combat and by the artillery bombardment. Many machine gun positions had been destroyed. German ammunition supplies were running low. German morale was deteriorating. Soldiers who had expected to fight a defensive battle for a few days found themselves trapped in 3 weeks of brutal attrition warfare. Captain Winans reached the southern edge of Belleau Wood at 1855 hours. His company had suffered 19 casualties during the advance. For killed, 15 wounded. Survivable casualties, though still painful. His soldiers took cover among the rocks and trees, caught their breath, and prepared for the assault into the woods. The woods on June 23rd were different from the woods on June 6th. The artillery bombardment had destroyed much of the canopy. Trees were shattered, branches littered the ground, and sunlight penetrated areas that had been dark and shadowed 17 days earlier. The underbrush had been torn apart by explosions. Visibility was better, which benefited attackers, but also made cover less effective. The woods smelled of death. Bodies of soldiers killed days or weeks earlier still lay where they had fallen, decomposing in the June heat. At 1900 hours, Winans received orders by Runner. Advance north through woods. Objective is northern edge. Eliminate all German resistance encountered. Simple orders for a complex task. Winans organized his company into 3 platoons advancing in parallel, with approximately 50 meters between platoons. Each platoon would advance independently, supporting adjacent platoons when possible, but primarily focus on clearing its assigned sector. The advance through the woods began at 19:15 hours. Within 10 minutes, Company A encountered German defensive positions. The first position was a machine gun emplacement built around a massive boulder, with a gun positioned to fire down a natural corridor between rocks. The German crew saw the Americans approaching and opened fire, killing 2 soldiers and wounding 3 others. The platoon took cover and returned fire, but the German position was too well protected to be suppressed by rifle fire. Sergeant William F. Moore, a squad leader from Michigan, recognized that his squad could not advance while the German machine gun was operational. He grabbed a satchel of grenades, told his squad to provide covering fire, and began maneuvering toward the German position using dead ground and fallen trees for cover. He crawled approximately 30 meters, approaching the position from an angle where the machine gun could not traverse to engage him. At 10 meters, he threw 3 grenades in rapid succession. The first grenade landed short. The second grenade landed among the German crew, killing 2 soldiers. The third grenade destroyed the machine gun. Moore's action allowed his squad to advance, but cost Moore his life. A German soldier shot him as he stood to throw the third grenade. This pattern repeated throughout the woods. American forces encountered German positions, engaged in firefights, flanked positions when possible, assaulted positions when flanking was impossible, suffered casualties, and continued advancing. The fighting was methodical, professional, and deadly. Every 100 meters of advance required eliminating 3 to 5 German positions and cost 10 to 20 casualties. Private First Class Louis Kukela, a Croatian immigrant serving in the 5th Marines, was advancing through a sector of the woods where German forces had established particularly strong defensive positions. His platoon encountered a German position with multiple machine guns covering intersecting fields of fire, a position that could not be flanked and was too strong to be assaulted frontally. The platoon was pinned down, suffering casualties from German fire, unable to advance or retreat. Kukela saw that his platoon would be destroyed if they remained in their current position. At approximately 20-30 hours, he left his cover and charged the German position alone, carrying a rifle and grenades. He advanced through German fire, firing his rifle as he ran, somehow avoiding being hit. At the German position, he killed 3 German soldiers with his rifle, threw grenades into a German dugout, killing 4 more soldiers, captured 2 German machine guns, and turned one of the guns on German forces attempting to counterattack. His action broke the German defensive position and allowed his platoon to advance. Kukela's action would earn him the Medal of Honor, one of 2 that he would be awarded for actions on the same day. By 2200 hours on June 23rd, American forces had advanced approximately 600 meters into Belleau Wood, roughly halfway through the remaining German-held territory. Casualties were mounting steadily. Company A, which had started the assault with 140 soldiers, was now down to 97 combat-effective troops. Other companies reported similar losses, but the advance was succeeding. German resistance was weakening. German soldiers were surrendering rather than fighting to the death. German ammunition was running out. At 0200 hours on June 24th, German forces in Belleau would receive orders from their division headquarters. Withdraw from Belleau Wood to positions north of Woods. Conduct fighting withdrawal. Preserve unit strength for future operations. The German High Command had concluded that Belleau Wood was not worth the casualties required to hold it. German forces had delayed American advance for 23 days, inflicting over 3,000 American casualties, but the cost of German forces, approximately 1,400 casualties, was becoming unsustainable. The German withdrawal began at 0300 hours. German soldiers abandoned their positions in small groups, moving north of the woods, attempting to disengage without being pursued by American forces. Some German units successfully withdrew. Other units were caught by American patrols and engaged in firefights that resulted in additional casualties on both sides. By 0600 hours on June 24th, most German forces had withdrawn from Belleau Wood. American forces discovered the German withdrawal during morning patrols on June 24th. Marine and Army units advanced through areas that had been heavily defended the previous day and found abandoned German positions. Some positions contained German wounded who had been left behind. Other positions contained equipment and ammunition that Germans had been unable to evacuate. By 0900 hours, American commanders realized that German resistance in Belleau Wood had collapsed. Major Maurice Shearer, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, sent a message to Brigade headquarters at 1030 hours on June 26, 1918. The message contained 6 words that would become part of Marine Corps legend. Wood's now U.S. Marine Corps entirely. The Battle of Belleau Wood was over. American forces, primarily Marines, supported by Army infantry, had cleared the woods of German forces after 26 days of continuous combat. The victory was tactically significant but strategically limited. Belleau, what was not the decisive battle of World War I, German forces continued to threaten Paris throughout the summer of 1918. The war would not end until November 1918, 5 months after Belleau Wood, but the battle had achieved something more important than territorial gain. The Battle of Belleau Wood established the United States Marine Corps as an elite combat force in the eyes of the American public, Allied commanders, and German military intelligence. The Marines had demonstrated that American forces could fight effectively on the Western Front. They had proven that aggressive offensive tactics, while costly, could break through German defensive positions. They had shown courage that impressed even experienced French and British officers who had become cynical about courage after 3 years of horrific casualties. The cost had been devastating. The 4th Marine Brigade suffered 4,177 casualties during the Battle of Belleau Wood, 1,062 killed in action, 3,115 wounded. That represented 52% casualties, more than half of the brigade's combat strength. Individual units suffered even higher casualty rates. Some rifle companies that started the battle with 250 soldiers ended with fewer than 50. The 5th and 6th Marine regiments required months to reconstitute their combat strength through replacements and training. German casualties were estimated at approximately 1,600 killed or wounded, based on prisoner interrogations, captured German records, and body counts. The casualty ratio favored German forces approximately 2.6 to 1. For every German casualty, American forces suffered 2.6 casualties. This ratio reflected the inherent advantage of defensive warfare on the Western Front and the inexperience of American forces in European combat. June 26, 1918, through present day, legacy and transformation. The Marines who survived the Battle of Belleau Wood were evacuated to rear areas for rest, medical treatment, and integration of replacement troops. The 4th Marine Brigade was reconstituted over July and August 1918, receiving approximately 3,000 replacement Marines who had trained in the United States and were shipped to France specifically to replace Belleau Wood casualties. The rebuilt brigade would continue fighting on the Western Front through the Meuse-Argonne offensive in September-November 1918, suffering additional casualties but demonstrating the combat effectiveness that had been established at Belleau Wood. Major Maurice Shearer, who had commanded the 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines during the final assault, was promoted to lieutenant colonel and awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership during the battle. In a 1920 interview, he reflected on the battle. "We paid a terrible price for a small piece of ground, but we proved something that needed proving. We proved that American Marines could fight European-style warfare and win. We proved that our training, our discipline, and our aggression could overcome German defensive positions. We lost over 4,000 men, but we gained the respect of every military force that observed the battle." The nickname Devil Dogs, Teufelhunden in German, became central to Marine Corps identity after Belleau Wood. American newspapers reported that German soldiers had given Marines this nickname because of their ferocious fighting style. The story claimed that Germans were so impressed by Marine aggression that they compared Marines to mythical hellhounds from German folklore. The nickname was embraced by the Marine Corps and became a permanent part of Marine culture. Modern historians have questioned the accuracy of the Devil Dog story. German military records from 1918 do not contain references to Teufelhunden. German soldiers' letters home do not mention the term. The phrase Teufelhunden is also grammatically incorrect in German. The proper phrase would be Teufelschund. Historians now believe that the Devil Dog's nickname was likely created by American journalists or Marine Corps public affairs officers as propaganda to enhance the Marine Corps' reputation. But whether the nickname was authentic or invented, it served a real purpose. The Battle of Belleau would transform the Marine Corps from a small force primarily known for shipboard security and small-scale expeditionary operations into a legendary combat force. The battle established the Marine Corps' institutional identity as an elite infantry force characterized by aggressive offensive tactics, extraordinary courage under fire, and willingness to accept heavy casualties to achieve objectives. Captain Lloyd Williams, who had famously responded, "Retreat. Hell, we just got here," at the beginning of the battle, was wounded during the fighting and evacuated to a field hospital. He survived his wounds and returned to duty in August 1918. He continued serving in the Marine Corps after World War I, eventually rising to the rank of colonel. When asked about his famous quote, Williams said in a 1935 interview, "I said what needed to be said at that moment. French soldiers were retreating. My Marines needed to understand that we were not retreating. Sometimes leadership is just saying the right words at the right time. Private Daniel Daly, who had charged German positions while shouting, "Come on, you sons of bitches! Do you want to live forever?" survived the battle despite being wounded multiple times. He was nominated for a third Medal of Honor for his actions at Belleau Wood, but the nomination was downgraded to a Navy Cross because Marine Corps policy discouraged awarding multiple Medals of Honor to the same individual. Daly remained in the Marine Corps until 1929, serving primarily as a recruiter and trainer. His famous charge at Belleau became a standard story taught to Marine recruits, emphasizing the importance of aggressive action under fire. Lieutenant Lemuel Shepard, who had led his platoon into the woods on June 6, survived the battle and continued his Marine Corps career for the next 40 years. He eventually rose to the rank of general and served as commandant of the Marine Corps from 1952 to 1955. Throughout his career, Shepard emphasized the lessons learned at Belleau Wood, the importance of small unit leadership, the necessity of adapting tactics to terrain and enemy capabilities, and the understanding that courage alone is not sufficient. Courage must be combined with tactical competence to achieve victory at acceptable cost. The tactical and doctrinal lessons from Belleau would influence Marine Corps training and operations for decades. The battle demonstrated that frontal assaults in extended lines, the tactic Marines used on June 6th, were suicidal against prepared defensive positions with machine guns. Post-battle analysis emphasized the importance of fire and maneuver, use of terrain for cover, and small unit tactics rather than rigid formations. These lessons were incorporated into Marine Corps training during the 1920s and 1930s and would be critical to Marine success in World War II Pacific campaigns. The battle also highlighted the importance of combined arms operations. Marine casualties at Belleau Wood were high partly because artillery support was inadequate. The French 75mm guns available for the assault lacked the destructive power to eliminate German defensive positions. Marine Corps planners recognized that future operations would require heavier artillery, better coordination between infantry and artillery, and development of specialized weapons like mortars and automatic rifles to provide infantry units with organic firepower. French commanders who observed the Battle of Belleau Wood had mixed reactions. They respected Marine courage and determination, but criticized Marine tactics as wasteful and primitive. French officers, who had learned through 3 years of horrific casualties that frontal assaults were obsolete, were shocked that American forces would employ such tactics. But French commanders also recognized that American aggressiveness had strategic value. The willingness to attack regardless of casualties created momentum and pressure that defensive-minded German forces found difficult to counter. German military analysis of Belleau would reach similar conclusions. German after-action reports acknowledged that American Marines had fought with unusual determination and complete disregard for casualties. German intelligence identified the Marine Corps as a force that would require special attention in future engagements. German tactical doctrine was modified to include specific guidance for defending against American assault tactics, emphasizing the importance of defense in depth and mobile reserves to counterattack American penetrations. The long-term impact on individual Marines who fought at Belleau was complex and often tragic. Many suffered from what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, though in 1918 the condition was called shell shock and was poorly understood. Some Marines struggled with alcohol abuse, difficulty maintaining employment, social isolation, and recurring nightmares about the battle. Medical and psychological support for veterans was minimal in the 1920s, and many Belleau Wood veterans suffered for decades without effective treatment. Private Carl Brannon, who had survived the assault across the wheat fields on June 6, struggled with trauma for the rest of his life. In his 1968 memoir, written 50 years after the battle, he described the psychological impact. "I came home from France, but part of me never left Belleau Wood. I still see men falling in the wheat fields. I still hear the sound of machine gun fire. I still smell death in the trees. War changed me in ways I could not explain to people who had not experienced it. And I carry that burden alone, because in 1918 we did not talk about such things." The battlefield at Belleau was preserved by the French government as a memorial to American sacrifice. The woods were cleared of unexploded ordnance and restored as a forest, though massive boulders and some remnants of defensive positions remained visible. In 1923, the French government officially renamed the woods Bois de la Brigade Marine, with the Marine Brigade, one of only 2 locations in France renamed to honor American military units. A memorial chapel was constructed near the woods, containing the names of Marines killed in the battle. The United States government established a military cemetery adjacent to Belleau Wood, Aisne-Marne American Cemetery, which contains the graves of 2,289 American soldiers and Marines, including many who were killed at Belleau Wood. The cemetery is maintained by the American Battle Monuments Commission and remains an active memorial site, where ceremonies are conducted annually on June 6 and June 26 to commemorate the battle. Modern military historians debate the significance and necessity of the Battle of Belleau Wood. Some argue that the battle was tactically unnecessary. Belleau Wood had minimal strategic value, and German forces would likely have withdrawn from the woods anyway as part of their broader defensive realignment in late June 1918. These historians view Belleau Wood as an example of wasteful attrition warfare, where inexperienced American commanders ordered attacks that more experienced French commanders would have avoided. Other historians argue that Belleau Wood was strategically essential because it demonstrated American combat capability at a critical moment. In June 1918, Allied morale was deteriorating after 4 years of war. French and British forces were exhausted. The German spring offensive had come dangerously close to breaking through Allied lines. American entry into the war was crucial to Allied victory, but Allies needed proof that American forces could fight effectively. Belleau Wood provided that proof, demonstrating that American soldiers and Marines could not only survive Western Front combat, but could attack aggressively and achieve objectives despite heavy casualties. The consensus among military professionals is that Belleau Wood was operationally significant because it established patterns and expectations that influenced subsequent operations. The battle proved that American forces would fight aggressively, accept high casualties, and persistent attacks until objectives were achieved. This reputation had psychological impact on German commanders, who became more cautious about engaging American forces. The battle also established the Marine Corps' institutional culture of aggressive offense, a culture that would define Marine operations throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century. The final assessment of Belleau Wood comes from an unexpected source, a 1957 interview with a German officer, Hauptmann Heinrich Müller, who had commanded a company defending Belleau Wood. When asked why German forces had eventually withdrawn from the woods, Müller responded, "We could not sustain the casualties. Every day we lost soldiers. Every night the Americans attacked. They never stopped. They never surrendered. They never showed doubt. We were veteran soldiers who had fought on the Western Front for 3 years. We had defeated British attacks, French attacks, Russian attacks. But the Americans were different. They did not fight like Europeans. They fought with a kind of fury that we had not seen before. Eventually, we had to withdraw, not because we were defeated tactically, but because we understood that the Americans would never stop attacking, and we would be destroyed if we remained." That assessment captures the essence of what the Battle of Belleau Wood achieved. American Marines did not win through tactical brilliance or superior technology. They won through relentless aggression, extraordinary courage, and willingness to accept casualties that would have been considered unacceptable by European standards. They paid a terrible price. Over 4,000 casualties in 26 days, but they proved that American forces could fight European-style warfare and win. The legacy of Belleau Wood extends beyond military history into American culture. The battle became the founding myth of the modern Marine Corps, the story that explains how Marines earned their reputation as elite warriors. Every Marine recruit learns about Belleau Wood during training. Every Marine officer studies the battle at professional military education courses. The phrase "devil dogs" remains part of Marine Corps identity more than a century after battle. And the tactical lessons from Belleau Wood, the importance of small unit leadership, the necessity of adapting to terrain, the understanding that courage must be disciplined and directed to be effective, continue to influence Marine Corps doctrine. The farmers and factory workers and college students who became Marines in 1917 did not set out to create a legend. They set out to do their duty in a war that their country had entered. At Belleau Wood, duty required them to attack across wheat fields swept by machine gun fire, to fight through woods that had become a three-dimensional killing ground, to accept casualties that seemed impossible to sustain, and continue attacking day after day until the objective was achieved. They did their duty. They paid a price that can barely be comprehended. And in doing so, they wrote a page in military history that has been studied, honored, and remembered for over a century.